There's a famous quote by Plutarch that says, "When Alexander saw the breadth of his domain, he wept for there were no more worlds to conquer." Now that's a guy with serious ambition issues, right? But let's rewind a little. We're talking about Alexander the Great, born in the summer of 356 BC to a family that was, let's say, a bit competitive. His dad, King Philip, was all about expanding the kingdom, but young Alex, well, he was just into taming wild horses. No biggie, right? Now imagine being a schoolmate of this kid. On show and tell day, you bring your pet rock, and Alexander walks in leading Bucephalus, the wildest stallion in all of Macedonia. Kinda puts your rock to shame, doesn't it? So, a kid who tames wild horses for fun, what do you think he does when he grows up? If your guess is, conquer the known world, you're right on the money. Fast forward a few years and we see Alexander, not playing with toy soldiers but commanding real ones. So, our lad Alexander, he's all grown up now, and he's not just playing Risk on a board game. No, he's playing Risk for real, on a world-scale map. You see, back in his time there were no video games, no Call of Duty or Fortnite. Nope, Alexander had to get his hands dirty in the real world. Picture this, our boy Alex, a young strapping lad of 20, is out there, leading armies, conquering kingdoms, and making kings kneel before him. He's not just playing King of the Hill, he's living it. This guy was the original conqueror, the OG world dominator. He began his real-life game of Risk in the lush landscapes of Persia, where he left no stone unturned, no city unconquered. From there, he moved westward, turning the golden sands of Egypt into his playground. Then, he set his sights on the mystical lands of India, where he battled mighty elephants and came out on top. Talk about animal lover, but wait, there's more. He didn't stop there. He even reached the icy mountains of Afghanistan, and guess what? He conquered that too. He was unstoppable, like a kid in a candy store, except the candy was countries and the store, well, the store was the world. And all this he did without the help of GPS or Google Maps. The guy didn't even have a smartphone. He just had a dream, a massive army, and a world ready to be conquered. In the end, Alex had a bigger empire than any of his predecessors, stretching from Greece to Egypt, from India to Afghanistan. He was the boy who had the world at his feet, quite literally. And that, folks, is how you turn the world domination game from your childhood into a full-time job. Now, Alexander didn't just conquer places, he also spread Greek culture and innovations wherever he went. Think of him as the original influencer, but instead of TikTok dances and avocado toast, he was spreading democracy, philosophy, and the occasional togas. His impact was like a massive cultural wave, washing over every land he conquered. Imagine the ancient version of globalization, but with more sandals and less Wi-Fi. Alexander's Hellenization project was the ancient equivalent of Hollywood and Silicon Valley combined. Except instead of movie stars and tech bros, we had philosophers and warriors. So what kind of innovations did Alexander bring along on his world tour? Well, for starters, he introduced the concept of city planning. Yes, before Alexander, cities were just a hodgepodge of buildings. Alexander, being the forward thinker he was, decided, hey, let's make this a bit more organized. And thus cities started to have a bit more structure. His version of SimCity was a lot less virtual and a lot more labor-intensive. Then there was the spread of the Greek language. He made Greek the lingua franca, the common language throughout his vast empire. It's like if everyone suddenly started speaking in Shakespearean English. "Doth thou even lift, bro?" would be a common gym phrase. And let's not forget about the libraries. Alexander was a big fan of knowledge. He saw a world thirsty for wisdom and said, "Let there be libraries." And so, libraries popped up across his empire like Starbucks on every corner. Finally, Alexander's cartographers were busy mapping out the known world. They were the Google Maps of their time. Only difference? They didn't have satellites or GPS. They had to do it the old-fashioned way, by actually going there. So, next time you use Google Maps, remember that Alexander did the same thing, just without the GPS and with a lot more walking involved. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. And for Alexander, it ended quite abruptly. You see, Alexander the Great didn't just live up to his name during his lifetime, he had an equally grand exit. In the summer of 3232, at the tender age of 32, Alexander found himself in Babylon, partying like it was, well, 3232. After a night of feasting and drinking, he fell ill. And 10 days later, he was no more. Now, imagine, if you will, the world's most powerful man, the conqueror of continents, the leader of legions, suddenly gone. It was like the world had lost its Elvis, and the groupies, his empire, was left wondering, who's gonna be the next king of rock and roll? Well, in the absence of a clear heir, his generals decided to divvy up the empire like it was a giant pizza, each taking a slice. Ptolemy snagged Egypt, Seleucus took the vast majority of Asia, and Antigonus got a nice slice of Anatolia. Alexander's empire, once a united front, was now a smorgasbord of independent kingdoms. And then, the inevitable happened. Just like when you're playing Monopoly with your siblings, things got ugly. The generals, now turned rulers, started quarreling, bickering, and going to war with each other. It was mayhem, chaos, a free-for-all. It was like Black Friday at a department store, but instead of discounted TVs and blenders, they were fighting for territories and power. In the end, Alexander's empire, once a beacon of unity and power, was reduced to a patchwork of squabbling kingdoms. It was the ultimate irony. The man who had spent his life uniting the world had left it more divided than ever. And just like that, the world's first Game of Thrones season finale happened. The stage was set for centuries of power struggles, wars, and a never-ending game of musical thrones. Such was the price of greatness. Now here's a thought for you to chew on. Imagine, if you will, a world where Alexander the Great didn't meet his untimely end in Babylon at the tender age of 32. What if he had lived longer, say another 3 or 4 decades? Just imagine the possibilities. If he'd kept up his pace, he might have conquered the entire known world, and then some. We'd probably be calling Mars Planet Alexander by now, and the man himself would be the first to set foot on it, of course. Because why not? He was Alexander the Great, not Alexander the Good enough. But let's dial back the ambition a tad. Instead of conquering the whole world, maybe Alexander would have decided to hang up his sword and shield. After all, he'd already done the impossible, right? Perhaps he'd have retired to a quiet life running a horse riding school. Just picture it. Alexander the Great, the world conqueror, trading in his battle-hardened steed for a stable full of ponies. His students wouldn't just learn how to ride a horse, but also how to conquer a horse, charm a horse, and maybe even how to convince a horse to help you conquer the world. You know, just in case. And who knows? In this alternate timeline, horse riding might have become a mandatory subject in schools, right alongside math, science, and history. We'd all be riding to work, to the grocery store, to the movies. Traffic jams? A thing of the past. Horse manure on the streets? Well, nobody said progress was always pretty. But maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves. Perhaps Alexander would have simply continued his conquests, eventually making Greek the universal language. Instead of saying hello, we'd all be greeting each other with a hearty Gaia Su, pronounced Ya-su. So, what do you think? If Alexander had lived longer, would we be living in a world where horse riding is a mandatory subject in school? Or perhaps we'd all be speaking Greek. The world will never know.